Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and we have a very interesting figure to take a look at today. This is actually, if the tag was facing the right way, you would see that this is by a company called Beryou. Now, what's interesting, I like how the tag just decided to flip right back, like I didn't want it facing that way. But what's interesting about that company is, if you can recall, quite a ways back, I reviewed at the time I thought was an unknownish kind of Diplodocus was actually by that same company called Beryou. Now we have this one here. The only difference is the Diplodocus was beautiful. A really nice looking Diplodocus figure, which I actually ended up repainting and making look pretty nice, I thought, kind of, sort of. However, this one does not share that same quality as the previous Beryou figure. So clearly we can't say for sure that whatever this company Beryou actually is produces really good high quality figures, because you might think that with the Diplodocus. However, this one not near as nice as far as like the fine detailing goes. That's not to say the figure is horribly ugly, because I actually love the overall appearance to the sculpt as well as the paint scheme. And what is also interesting about this Parasaurolophus is I had reviewed the Boley, like multiple dinosaur pack. There was a whole bunch of dinosaur figures in this set of Boley figures I reviewed a little ways back, not long ago actually, and this Parasaurolophus, the exact sculpt was in there, and in fact I actually think potentially even the same paint scheme, or at least one very similar, which I loved the Parasaurolophus from that set, and that was kind of one of the reasons why I was really interested in picking this one up, because I loved it in the smaller version. I figured I would love it in the larger version, and although it definitely does look fun from a distance, it's not near as nice up close. And it might be another one of those instances where if the paint application was a little more realistic, it might look nicer, but I honestly don't think that would be the case in a way, because the actual fine detailing of the figure is really, really poor. And to show you that, we're going to go ahead, jump straight to a closer look right now. So starting up here at the head sculpt of the Parasaurolophus, it definitely looks, from a distance like it's got a decent, head sculpt to it. The eye is definitely overpainted. I will say that. It's definitely got a little too much paint in there. But once we actually move closer, you can see that although it looks, somewhat appealing, the detailing aspect is almost non-existent as far as the fine detailing goes. Like, it's just very, very smooth, totally muted as far as a detailing aspect goes. You can see like the structure of the head and stuff. Like, you can see some creasing here behind the mouth, but for one instance, look at the beak. Like, you really don't see anything going on detail-wise there on the beak. It does have nostrils sculpted out. As you lead up into the crest, you can continue to see, although there's like a very, very, very fine amount of detail that you can almost kind of make out just due to the light shining off of it. Looking at it here in person, for the most part, it's just really smooth and doesn't look that great, which is a very big downside, because when I had seen this on the listing on AliExpress, I really had high hopes for it to be at least somewhat decent due to how nice the Diplodocus sculpt actually was, but the figure here in hand isn't near as nice as I was expecting it to be as far as a detailing standpoint. The paint application is definitely pretty fun. I do kind of like that. It could have been done a little bit nicer, a little bit more consistently, but it's still a pretty fun look. But the actual coloration used is really, really bright. Like, as far as this orange, it's a super bright, glossy orange. The yellow is a super bright, glossy yellow. So again, more various aspects of the model that are a downside. I don't like the glossy look of the figure at all. I don't like the brighter tones of color. It makes a really flashy dinosaur figure, but not a realistic one at all. Again, the eye paint is pretty sloppy, but we have kind of like a yellowish or an off-white there for the eye, as well as a black pupil, and then kind of a white spot to sort of insinuate eye shine right there. As far as the head goes, we primarily just have the orange up here, just one tone of orange on the crest and leading down into the beak, and then yellow here for the side of the face, and then a stripe of brown that runs up and around and over the eye. And then we also have some of that brown leading down here on the back from the crest. We do have a row of ridges that runs down that neck and actually leads down the entire course of the Parasaurolophus. But again, as we lead down throughout the body, you can see like some really nice creasing and stuff going on here in the skin of the throat, as well as kind of like some hanging skin here down under the throat of the Parasaurolophus, even some creases right there. But if you get nice and close, yet again, you don't see any actual skin texture, so we have some detailing, but not enough to make it look nice. And that continues to be the case as you move throughout the entire figure. Like, you could see a lot of creasing and, some minor attempts at detail, but it's really just missing the type of detail that you need for it to actually look more like a lifelike model as opposed to just a really cheap dinosaur toy, which is really depressing because the model itself, like, I feel like the overall appearance is really, really nice, like an absolutely gorgeous looking Parasaurolophus, and it's probably one of my favorite looks of a Parasaurolophus, just walking along on all fours, really nice thick tail as we lead out the length of the tail. I even like the ridges running along the back. The only thing I think that would have made this a little nicer would have been like that skin here. Like, I always loved that on Parasaurolophus. I don't know why. But again, the detailing definitely is muted throughout the entire figure. There's almost none at all. Even leading down here into the foot, you can see the nails are painted with a nice dark gray, and you can see a little bit of detail as far as like the toes and stuff go, but there's just zero skin texture to the figure at all. Again, we have like wrinkles and creases and stuff here in the stomach region. We do have a seam that runs straight through, and that's because the figure is kind of like that soft squishy feel. So you pretty much always have those seams, which is definitely to be expected. And again, the Diplodocus was the exact same thing, having that soft squishy feel, but was just so much more of a higher quality sculpt when it came to the detailing aspect. Again, like right here in the thigh, there's just no skin texture. There's no muscle definition at all. It's a nice thick looking thigh. You can see a little bit of muscle definition sort of in the calf, basically just the shape of the calf muscle, but no actual like toning to it at all. And then leading down into the foot, again, just very, very muted detail. And I'm obviously going to go ahead and say that this figure was meant to appeal to children, but even children would like to have at least a somewhat detailed sculpt, I would imagine. Not to mention on the listing, it was actually listed as a model, not really so much of a toy. But you could see even here on the underside, again, there's a slight amount of like skin texture. There's probably more here on the underside than you see elsewhere on the figure at all. But definitely not the best Parasaurolophus. Again, just looking super toy-like, which can be appealing at times, but the fact that the dinosaur was kind of marketed similar to the Diplodocus made me think I would be getting a really highly detailed model similar to the Diplodocus, and considering how much I actually really like the sculpt of the Parasaurolophus, I was definitely excited about that aspect. But it's not a total loss because he's still kind of appealing. He just goes from being like a potentially cool model down to just being a fun-looking toy version of a Parasaurolophus, and not all that good of one either. But still, not the worst thing in the world, but definitely not even close to a great Parasaurolophus. And on top of being, just a very poor attempt at a sculpt for the Parasaurolophus, you can see that he stands pretty nicely, right? Like, he looks like he's doing all right. Like, his stance is in a quadrupedal stance. He's clearly standing bipedally because these front legs are not touching the ground. And the only reason for that is because he's leaning against the backdrop here. So if we are going to pull this out and attempt to stand it the way it should be, standing, which would be like this, it does not stand. Now we'll try it the other way, just in case my table here is off level. Nope. In fact, it's actually kind of hard to even get the legs to touch at the same time. It doesn't stand at all. Down again, just doesn't stand no matter which way you put it. And that is really impressive to me because it is a quadrupedal figure, a quadrupedal pose, I should say, for the Parasaurolophus. Obviously, the Parasaurolophus could go bipedal if it wanted to, but this specific version here is in a quadrupedal pose. How in the world can you bow the legs on a dinosaur model that badly that even a quadrupedal version of a dinosaur doesn't stand? That one is really impressive. That's actually, I think, the first time I've ever had a quadrupedal stance on a dinosaur, even if it's come from like an AliExpress site where it was kind of a bootleg that came and didn't stand. That's super impressive. The only way I can get it to stand is by leaning against the backdrop. And of course, when I say super impressive, I mean that as sarcastically as possible, because that's not a good thing. That's actually a very bad thing that this has that bad of a warped leg issue. And considering it's the kind of soft, squishy feel, I don't think the hot water, cold water trick is going to work for it. So it's just cursed with the poor balance for the rest of its eternity. But the figure, again, if you look at it from right here, you don't get close enough to notice just how muted the detail is and stuff. Like, it looks okay. for being a really, kind of appealing looking Parasaurolophus. It's just that the detail is so dreadful on the figure. The paintwork isn't really that great. Kind of a cool paint scheme, not really nicely applied. And the entire thing is a really ugly gloss coat and doesn't balance, so there's a ton of issues with this figure. But as far as a size goes, for a length from the snout to the tail, you were looking at about 15.5 inches, or about 39.5, closing in on 40 centimeters. And then as far as a height goes to the top of the crest, you were looking at a little over 6.5 inches, or about 16.5 centimeters, somewhere in that vicinity. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line in comparison to our Beryou Parasaurolophus, and you can definitely see next to these figures that it sports a very large size. Unfortunately, it doesn't stack up in detail or paintwork or anything like that, but it does have a larger size going for it, so there is at least one impressive aspect of the figure. So this Parasaurolophus is definitely a letdown as far as this figure goes, and they actually had quite a few other of those kind of same Boley type figures that were in that pack that I bought, the multi-pack. They had a lot of those, but in a larger scale similar to this, and one of the things that, kind of drew me to this was that the Diplodocus I had reviewed prior was also in the Boley pack, so I had again, high hopes that this one could be potentially as highly detailed as the Diplodocus was, because the actual larger version of that was gorgeous, but that is not the case. This one is definitely a very washed out, very toy-like looking figure, and not even toy-like, we love our Jurassic Park and Jurassic World toys, but this is like toddler style quality toys, and you don't want to buy toddler toys from any AliExpress sellers, because you're probably going to get figures that potentially have some hazardous material used for their paint, and that's probably the case with this Parasaurolophus, so don't buy toys from AliExpress for your toddlers. That's just, something that I can say with a fair amount of confidence. But again, this Parasaurolophus doesn't look good from a detailing standpoint. But when you stand back and kind of take it all in, it definitely has a very flashy and almost appealing appearance to it. Like, I love the overall appearance to the sculpt. I'm always a big fan of a Parasaurolophus walking on all fours, especially when it has that kind of thicker tail like it has here. Very reminiscent to the Masterpiece Models Parasaurolophus that is sculpted by Darren McDonald. Like, I really love that Parasaurolophus, and this has a very similar look to that one as far as the overall appearance and sculpt goes. But once you get past the impressive size of the figure and the, further away view of the figure and get closer, you realize that the actual skin texture is non-existent. The detailing aspect isn't good at all. The paintwork is just very much so looking like paint on a figure as opposed to actual body color. And, some areas like the brown stripes actually look okay on the figure, and they play off of the lighter coloration of the body beautifully, but they're so, randomly placed and just not given, a good design, so it kind of makes them look very, very poor, even though they're applied nicely with an airbrush. But again, the figure as a whole is not something that I would recommend. If you take all of those downsides and combine it with the fact that even being a quadrupedal stance, it has zero balance, it is not a very good Parasaurolophus figure, and I definitely do not recommend picking it up. So I did want to get this review out just to let you guys know that if you happen to spot this on AliExpress or something, that you don't make the same mistake that I did. Unless you actually do find this figure appealing, then have at it. I will include a link in the description to where I did buy this if you would like to actually purchase one, because it does have some kind of redeeming factors to it, as it sort of is appealing, again, from across the room, but I definitely don't recommend picking it up because it's not that great overall. But one way or another, if you are interested, there will be a link in the description waiting for you. If you're not, that's probably the smarter decision. Either way, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.